All right, so welcome to today's session. What we're looking at today is we plan on looking at logistics and supply chain, right? So we did some questions recently from the past papers, and in the past papers we had 1 or 2 questions. I was looking at logistics and supply, so I decided to just put together some slides for us to go through this. All right. So let's talk about logistics and supply chain operations. CXC syllabus, what they want you to do is to be able to explain the term logistics and supply, right? So we want to start off by talking a bit about those 2 terms, logistics and supply. Any of you could give me an idea of what you think logistics and they're 2 separate terms, right? What you think logistics is and what you think supply chain operation is, or maybe involve. Anybody can give me an idea? So when we talk about logistics and supply chain operations, logistics basically, it referring to the overall process of how we manage, how we find the resources that we need in order to make the final product for the consumer. But more so, it is very specific to getting the resources. Where are you going to store it? How are you going to transport it? And we're talking about getting it to us as well as to the final destination. So not just us sourcing the raw material, but the entire process involving transporting it to us, right? Packaging, material handling. If we have to perform some sort of production process on it, right? It involves, how is it going to go through those stages? When it is completed, where are we going to keep it, right? How are we going to secure it? And then how are we going to transport it? So supply chain operations too. Here we're looking at the management of the flow on goods and services for the company. So we're looking at the processes that is going to take our raw materials and change it into the final product. And it also looks at not only the supply side, but in terms of the distribution side as well, in terms of how are you going to make sure that you could maximize the customer value, right? By ensuring you have no kinks in your supply chain or kinks in your supply side of activities that could result in you not being able to have something in stock or on the shelf. Yeah. So that's the definition of logistics and supply chain operations. So when we talk about logistics, there are components of logistics. You would hear people referring sometimes to something called the forward flow or reverse flow, or forward logistics and reverse logistics, right? Logistics also entails the storage of goods, right? Once I worked on this construction site, right, when they were doing the Hyatt and the 2 towers there, and part of the construction company that did that project was Buies. Buies is a French company, and they had a department that was in charge of the logistics and basically their procurement and supplies. The logistics meant that they need to be able to know at what stage of the project they're going to need what materials. And then even when the materials get here, sometimes you're talking about the storage and transport of goods from, if it's coming on a container, all the way to the site. And then where is it going to be stored on the site until it is of use? So things like the tiles and the lighting fixtures and all of these things, they have to be stored somewhere and somebody manages that. All right. Another very important component of logistics that people sometimes overlook is the services, and we will get into that a bit. But when we talk about the services, we're talking about things like the insurance, because we need to insure the items that are coming into us, right? And we're also talking about information between destinations, right? We need to communicate what is going to, what we will be receiving, what should be going out, and other things like this. So forward flow, when we're talking about the forward flow, we're talking about the forward movement of goods. So this is when they go from raw materials across the end consumer. So I used an example earlier of a woodworking factory where we basically make furniture. Let's say we make tables, chairs, bookshelves, cupboards, things like that, right? Chest of drawers, things like that. Our raw material is going to come in, which would be our predominantly our lumber, our wood that we'll be using to build these and fabricate these things. And then we're looking at the product development. We're looking at how we're going to take this into the factory, how much of these things we're going to make, what we're going to need. We will have to assemble these things. After we assemble them, we will then need to look at the distribution process, right? After people purchase these items, how is it going to get? Or maybe we may even have like retailers who purchase these things from us. You know, sometimes they are these variety stores, and you'd see they have a couple chest of drawers, a bookshelf, a cupboard, right? A lot of times, when like a manufacturing company produce these things, they would have to look at that distribution side before it actually gets to the consumer. So that direction in terms of the flow of goods, starting from your raw materials, getting all the way to the consumer, is what they refer to in logistics as the forward flow of goods. The reverse flow now is not from the, well, it involves things that happen after delivery. Now, things that happen after delivery could involve returns from customers, but a lot of times there could be also recycling programs, product disposals, right? You might even recover assets. So to give you some more real life examples relating to that, some companies take back their batteries, right? I'm aware of, you ever thought about what happens to like old PCs and laptops when companies, they outfit floors with you know, computers, desktops for their staff to use, and then at times you know, they have to upgrade these things and they get new desktops. They have to dispose of this. So some companies, they would recall these things, recycle them, right? Another example that is very common is bottles. When you think about Carib, right, brewery here in Trinidad, they recycle bottles, so we could return some of these bottles. So this is part of, or this is an example of the reverse flow. When we talk about logistics, we are looking at things that we could reuse, things that could be repaired, remanufactured, recycled, right? It's important for the firm to pay attention to this because it allows them to manage their stock levels in terms of when products are returning, and it will help them to plan how are you going to deal with these things that are coming back in, right? So think of like Carib or even Coca-Cola. At one point in time, they had the returnable glass bottles. You know, I don't know if you guys know about those half-liter Coca-Cola bottles. Yeah?
No.
You don't know about them? Yeah, that was like when I was in secondary school, I had the half-liter. It was like $2.50, and if you walk with your bottle, you get for $2. Big glass bottle. I'll pull it up on Google for you all in a little bit. So anyway, reverse flow. We could also look at it from an ecological standpoint as well, right? This is where a business might try to reduce their environmental footprint. So they may look at refurbishing damaged items so they can be resold. Sometimes you go to like places like Price Mart or Courts or these places, and they may have a scratch and then sale, right? The recycling of parts or materials to create new products, or just the mere recycling of it. The entire foreign use industry is based on the recycling of parts, right? The using of old vehicles. Sometimes these guys would take old models that are not fit for being licensed onto the roads, and they'll cut it up and bring it here as parts, right? Returning packaging materials, we talk about that. Some companies take back bottles, others take back cartoons and boxes and things like this. All right, so this is from an ecological standpoint. Storage of goods. We said this was another important component for logistics. All right, what it involves. So it involves inventory management. Basically, this is your practice or the process where you're trying to manage your inventory levels. You're trying to manage your inventory levels for different reasons. The obvious one is bottlenecks. Bottlenecks refer to a situation where items become out of stock and it's in demand and you don't have it. And you probably have, you see what people tend to not realize is you have a waiting time. It's not like as the product is finished on the shelf and you as the retailer or the business organization, once more, you're going to get it instantaneously the following day. In some instances, these things have to come from abroad, overseas. So it's important for management to look at setting a minimum level, right? A minimum level of inventory. This is part of controlling the inventory holding levels. Although we look at the minimum level, so we don't have bottlenecks, we also need to look at the maximum. because there's a cost associated with storing too much goods. If you have a lot of goods, then you're going to need space to store them, right? It might even cost more to store them in terms of insurance, which we'll get to a little later. So you want to minimize your storage costs and manage your current as well as your future stock requirements in terms of everything that is involved in storing the stock, right, that you have right now, and manage future stock requirements in terms of those that need to come into the organization. So basically, good inventory management would allow you to always be able to meet your customer needs, right? And you want to do this in an economical way so that you're always managing the inventory cost. You're trying to keep it at an acceptable level. Warehousing is another element on the storage of goods, right? The inventory management is just the management part of the inventory. But where are these goods going to be stored, right? With our example that we spoke of before with the what was it? Furniture company, furniture manufacturing place. They if we make all of these cupboards and these bookcases and tables and stuff, and we make too much, where are we going to keep it? So it's important for us to look at our production line and ensure that it is in line with our warehousing capacity, right? It is also important for this element or this area of the business to liaise very closely with the marketing department, because the amount of stock that we have or don't have in the warehouse department depends on how heavily marketed that product is. Are we pushing these goods out? Is there a high demand? Do we need to continue rolling more finished products off? Is demand low right now, right? Take, for example, during the pandemic, we had periods where the retail sector was closed. Then I don't need to be producing a lot, right? I want to try and keep my warehousing levels low. Understand? Insurance. So insurance is coverage that is provided against any physical damage or loss of goods when we either ship in goods, whether we have it already, and what it helps to do is to help us minimize or reduce any kind of financial losses that we may get if it is, these goods should be damaged by fire, flood, theft, any of these things. So usually what you will find is that businesses would insure their stock, right? Very important, especially if it's traveling overseas, because you have no control really of the elements involved when it is being shipped via rail. But we don't have rail here in Trinidad, or air or sea. So that what we just described or we looked at there was more along the lines of logistics. So now we want to talk a bit about supply chain management. And we said those are two different things, because the logistics looking at acquiring your raw materials, everything that you need, right, in order to get your product to your customer. And the supply chain here now looking at more or less transforming the raw materials that you are getting into a finished product, right? So we're talking about the transformation of natural resources. In our example, that would be the timber, right, that we receive. We're looking at moving it and storing it, right? We're going to have to get the lumber probably from a lumber yard or something, and then we would need to store it as well. We're looking at the production process in terms of processing our lumber to turn it into the furniture that we sell. We're going to need to store not only finished products, but we're also going to need to store work in progress. We're not going to finish a table or chair set instantaneously in the same day in which we started. Yeah. And then we need to also look at moving the finished product from our warehouse to the customer. So these are the things that are involved in your supply chain management. As the name implies, you're looking at the supply side of things, right? So transformation of natural resources, here we're looking at the extraction of raw materials from the earth, preparing these raw materials so we could convert it to inputs for the manufacturing process, right? If we look at, let's say, a jam or jelly factory, they're looking at acquiring whatever fruits that they're going to be using to make the product, which is jam. So let's say they are doing guava jam, they're going to be looking at, getting the natural resources from the farmers, and then what is the process involved in collecting these raw materials and now starting to move it towards processing. So the move that leads us into movement and storage of raw materials, obviously. So this is taking it from the point of extraction, which would be the farm in this example that we're using right now, to our warehousing facility. Here we need to look, the logistics may need to look at things in terms of how the warehousing facility needs to be outfitted in order to keep it, right? So we get maximum shelf life. Processing of the raw materials, here we're looking at taking our guava, right, and converting it into our finished good, which is the jam. So we're looking at the conversion of raw materials into the final products, right? Storage of your work in progress. Now, this is a bit more applicable to the manufacturing side of things. So when I was talking previously about the woodwork factory, you're going to have incompleted tables, incompleted cupboards, right? We're looking at where we're going to store them so that they're not damaged, so that we would know, okay, these in this particular area here, these just need doors and hinges to come on or something like that. All right, so we have to store them somewhere before we could complete them, so we could distribute it to our wholesalers or retailers, right? And then the last part of your supply chain, there was one of the last main activities is delivering the product. So this involves moving the completed furniture from the manufacturing area, from our woodwork factory, across to the consumer, which in some cases could be a wholesaler who's buying them in large quantities and then selling them over to retailers, or it could be directly to a retailer, like I mentioned earlier, the variety stores, you know, those small village or community type convenience stores that sell everything. So the supply chain and the distribution chain a bit different, because the supply chain dealing with the supply side of things. Our distribution chain now is looking at that chain that takes the finished product all the way to the consumer. So the supply chain, think about it, right? It's on the supply side, dealing with taking the raw materials and converting it into the product, finished product. The distribution chain now, we're talking about moving this product now, right? From the producer, which would be us, across the different parties that could be involved in distribution. So here I have listed the three main types of distribution chains. There are many others, but these are just the main ones, right? The components of these channels would usually involve a producer, which in our example would be the woodwork factory. There could be a wholesaler, right, which would be a company that is involved in selling large quantities of furniture, right? And then it could be the retailer. The retailer could be somebody like, you know, Courts or Singer or American Stores. And then it could be the consumer, right? Now there are variations to this distribution chain. As you can see here, I have three. There's one with 4 components or 4 elements. There's one with 3, and then there's one with 2. So let's talk about the first one. The first channel is the longest because it has all 4 parties involved: the producer, the wholesaler, the retailer, and the consumer, right? Good examples of this type of distribution chain is your wine and adult beverage industry, right? So this is what you would find like for a winery. So they cannot sell directly to a retailer. There must be someone in between that is going to be taking this large quantities of alcohol and then passing it on to the retailer. A good example of that here in Trinidad is Brydon's. Brydon's is actually a wholesaler. They in turn could sell to groceries and other outlets like that. You know, places like, we all know, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Naughty Grape. They do wine as well, right? Probably a bit more on the, what should I say, more finer side, more specialized side, I guess. Not your common barefoot on what you'd find in the grocery. They might do other more exotic type wine or better quality then. So basically with this type of distribution chain, right, it has a 3-tier system, meaning that basically the law, talking specifically to the winery, it requires the winery to first sell the product to a wholesaler, right, and then into a retailer. There are a bit of legal elements involved. So for example, you have to have a license in order to sell liquor, and then there are different types of license. So the retailer is going to have the correct type of license to sell liquor to consumers, right? The wholesaler is going to have a different type of a license to acquire liquor in large quantities. I don't know if you guys knew this, but there's a limit to the amount of liquor these license allow the business owner to hold on in terms of on their premises. The other chain is three components here. So it cuts out the wholesaler. So this is straight from the producer to the retailer to the consumer, right? Basically, there's no intermediary. A good example is Dell, right? Dell is large enough to sell its products directly to retailers. So for example, they may sell to Target or to Best Buy, right? Other retailers, online retailers like this, right? Circuit City, another example. So they would sell directly to them, and then the retailers, these online retailers, would sell to the consumers. And well, the last chain, obviously, you're going to lose those middle parties, and it's straight from the consumer, straight from the producer directly to the consumer. Perfect example is Amazon selling their Fire tablets, right? Directly from them. They're the producers and makers of manufacturers of the Fire tablet, and they would sell it to consumers directly. Consumers here could be a broad range of consumers, right? Because it could be a large consumer who would be probably buying for like your shop, your local shop, or it could just be an individual like me that want to purchase a Kindle for my personal use. All right. So this is the shortest distribution channel possible. Basically, it just knocks out the wholesaler and retailer involved. So let's do a little bit of recap. All right. Can you tell me what logistics is about? Right? Can you tell me what logistics is about? Then you would tell me what supply chain operations is about. Can you name the components in the distribution chain, the largest chain? And what is the shortest distribution chain? All right, good. So let's continue. So next we want to talk about transportation, right? So to get our goods from our supplier to the people that we want to sell our goods to, our consumers, one of the very important things is transportation, right? Is a very important component of the overall logistics. Now, there are four main modes of transportation, which involves truck, ship, train, and plane, right? Sometimes you can also hear them alternatively described as being road, marine, rail, or air shipments. There are other modes as well. So pipelines, you use pipelines for things like gas, right, and other materials like that. Water, we would use that as well. Oil, we use that as well. And there's also digital delivery, right? Because in this globalized and very technology-driven state, right, especially environment in terms of what the business operates in, right, there is now digital delivery as a form of transportation, right? So each of these modes of transportation, they have their unique benefits, right, in terms of advantages and disadvantages. We want to take a look at these now. But before we get into that, there are two terms that I need you to understand or to be able to differentiate in between, which is the term called intermodal and the term called multimodal. Now, before I get into the actual definition, I want to talk about what makes them different from each other, because it's very similar, right, in terms of what they refer to, what they mean. So when we're talking about intermodal, I want you to pay attention to remember that it involves the movement of goods by probably several different parties or several different modes of transport. But each mode of transport has their own independent contract, right, with the person who's purchasing or moving the goods. With multimodal, right, this is same movement of cargo from the origin to destination. It would involve different modes of transport, but this is done under a single contract. There's one contract governing the movement of the goods. If it's going to go by truck first to get to a cargo yard, then it's going to go by ship, and then it's probably going to travel by rail after it gets to your country where it needs to be. The difference with the multimodal is that this movement of the cargo, right, the entity responsible for doing it, there's one single contract governing or contracted to do the entire journey, right? So main difference, multiple carriers contracted to fulfill a single journey in intermodal, multimodal, single carrier contracted to do this the entire journey. All right, you're okay with that? So let's get into the modes of transportation now. So we said there's air, we say there's rail, we said there's truck or road, right? And we say that there's sea. So let's talk about air first. So there are obvious advantages of air. Basically, one being that you could deliver items quickly over long distances. So this is where FedEx, you know, they have their fast pack packages, and DHL and these companies, they could get things quickly, right? Logistics play a very important role in their operations as well, because they're in the business of logistics, right? It gives high levels of security for sensitive items. Also, it can be used for a wide range of goods. Now, the main disadvantage, obviously, is that the cost is going to be much higher than others, and it's not suitable for all type of goods, right? There are other things such as flight cancellations or delay. So we had a lot of bad weather over the last 2 days, and that could have resulted in flights being grounded, right? Also, if the plane is going to be making multiple stops at different airports with cargo, then you're going to have to pay taxes at these different airports, right? So it becomes costly in terms of the taxation. Also, the fuel, right? Fuel and currency surcharges is going to be added to that cost of moving the freight. Also, the other disadvantage is that you will need to move the items when they get to the point of destination, because the airplane is going to land in an airport, and after it gets to the airport, you're going to incur additional fees or costs to move it from the airport to the final destination. All right, so those are the disadvantages with air. Obviously, there are some advantages if you need something delivered very quickly. Depending on the item, it's probably the better type of mode of transport to use. Rail. Now, rail is very cost effective and is an efficient way of moving goods. You'd see this method of transportation in a lot of developed countries, right? The main disadvantages really is just same kind of scheduling flex in terms of the time, in terms of delays, right? At times, certain rails lines, train lines could go down, right? The routes, now the way our railway system works is there are different routes, and they can move trains into different routes at different times. And the timetables sometimes could be inflexible, meaning that a train could only pass on this particular line on this particular time, or on this particular day, or something like that. So sometimes it's very inflexible, especially in remote regions. This is not something we'd be very accustomed to here. But if we look at you know, the way cargo is moved around in, let's say, places like the UK, right? You'd understand that, you know, there's probably one train going to a very remote region each day. You miss the opportunity to get the cargo on that train, then you're gonna have to wait an entire day to do it again, right? It's more expensive than road, although it is cheaper than air. And then obviously mechanical failure. Sometimes, like I described before, the train line could be down, the train itself could be down, and usually these types of industries are always unionized, and railway workers could strike. There could be industrial action, and that could disrupt services. Road, right? Road, obviously low cost, because we could use diesel, we could use natural gas, right? It is advantageous in the sense that once there's roadways, there's road networks, and you can go the furthest, right, without, you know, any kind of hindrance, right? We're going to find obviously more instances where you're going to have roads as opposed to rails, or where a plane could land comfortably, or airstrip. There's the possibility to schedule transport and track the location of the goods, right, using a GPS. You have the option as well as safe and private delivery, right? For example, the banks, they use TT Post Track Back, and they would mail your credit card or your ATM card to you now, and you get a notification on your cell phone informing you that it was mailed using Track Back today. TT Post would contact you when they're coming to drop it off, and you have to sign to collect, or you can have someone at your home sign to collect, right? So easy advantage, low cost. It's not going to cost the bank a lot to use things like this. The disadvantage is long distances over land can take more time. This is not something that we might be able to relate to here in Trinidad, right? But if we think about, there's a Netflix show that I was looking at, it's probably an episode or two on some time ago, with these truckers, and they go from state to state, right? And sometimes they drive for really long hours, moving things from like North America all the way down to South or Central America, right? Or like from somewhere up in the north all the way down to Miami or something. Traffic delays is a major thing that would affect your road transportation. That is something I would be able to relate to here. When you have those delivery guys going out to do deliveries to groceries and places like that, they run into a lot of traffic, especially in the more urban areas, Port of Spain, Chaguanas, Arima. There's a risk of goods being damaged, especially over long distances, right? We have seen instances before where trucks have gotten into accidents on the highways and goods are damaged, right? In some countries, there are toll charges. Luckily, we don't have that here in Trinidad. But in other countries, to go into the more urban areas, like in London, for example, a lot of people, even if they may have cars, if they're working in central London, they will either use the tube, right, or the bus or something, because the toll charges to drive your car and park your car, there's also charges for parking, is very high. And that's to kind of keep as minimum traffic out of the city areas, right? And then, well, this one may not apply to us, but if you're looking at trucking cross-state, there are different road and traffic regulations in different states. So you'd have to be aware of that if you're doing, well, for the trucking company that's doing transportation by road. Marine, this is the other very common mode of transportation. We would use this a lot at Trinidad and Tobago. The entire foreign use car market would ship things like this, the cars, large volumes at a low cost, right? Shipping containers, basically, you could use it for further transportation, right? So after it gets to the port, you could unpack containers and then either road or rail would be able to move it. Now, there's a lot of uncertainty with it, in the sense that the routes and timetables are inflexible. It could change. You could experience bad weather. You could have delays, right? It is slower than all the other transport systems, because again, you're going by sea, and these are large vessels that we're talking about, right? So bad weather obviously is going to affect their ability to keep on schedule. There's also the port duties and taxes, right? You're going to incur taxes if the boat is going to be making multiple stops at different ports. And the tracking of goods progress is a bit difficult, right? Because the route could change. You're going to incur additional costs, just like with the aircraft, because when it does get to the final destination, you're going to have to get it off of the ship and then to your final point of destination. And usually the freight weights, they are subject to your fuel and currency surcharges, right? So whatever is the cost of fuel and currency surcharges, you're going to be, the currency surcharges has to do with where the boat is originating from, right? You're going to incur these into your freight rates as well. Pipeline. So pipeline is ideal for liquids and gases, as I mentioned earlier, right? Petroleum, natural gas, best way to transport these. You could lay it through difficult terrain as well as underwater. So if you look at, like countries like Dubai and stuff, they use a lot of pipeline to move their oil and their natural gases from the oil fields to where they need to get it to. Usually they would have some sort of plant, right? Processing plant closer to a port area, so that they can take it straight to that port area and then load oil tankers and stuff like this, right? It involves very low energy consumption, little maintenance, and they're very safe generally, and accident-free and environmentally friendly. Where it is not flexible is that it could only be used for a few fixed points. It's not going to be able to continuously add on to it. And this leads to the other disadvantage, where the capacity is not something that you can easily adjust. You can't increase it. Once you lay the pipe, usually once you put these things down as there for a very long time, because they would stretch a vast area, it is difficult as well to make security arrangements for the pipe. And then if it is running underground, it is very difficult to repair or even detect leakage, right? So that's a main disadvantage there with pipelines. And the last one that I mentioned was digital delivery. Here we're talking about the delivery or distribution of digital media content, right? This could involve things like audio, video, software, video games, right? A lot of emphasis goes into social media marketing, and as a whole step in terms of delivery. Now, in terms of getting your final product to the customer, part of that marketing element is going to be in terms of getting content onto your social media platforms and things like this, right? In other instances, your product may be something that is not tangible that you can hold in your hand, is actually packaged, kind of like what we're doing right now. We are delivering digitally, remotely classes to you, right? So this is an example of delivery as well. And I have to take into consideration the logistics involved, you know, internet speed, provider in terms of who's providing me with my online streaming capabilities. How could I get this to you in a concise way that you can use it later on? You know, is it real time? Can it be done recorded so you can view it at a later point in time? All of these things are involved inside of your digital delivery. And this as well is one mode of transportation that we are now considering. Good. So now that we get to this point and we kind of completed with modes of transportation, can you name for me one mode of transportation and give an advantage, right? Or, well, not all, one advantage and one disadvantage. So one mode of transportation, one advantage of that mode, and one disadvantage of that mode. Yeah? All right. So now that we finish with our transportation and we know an example of resume share, right? An example of each. We're going to go back now to supply chain operations. So we want to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of supply chain operations, and that should kind of wrap up what I had in mind to discuss for today. So when we talk about the advantages of supply chain operations, I've summarized it here in this slide. Basically, we're talking about things like a better quality of life, wealth creation, new and innovative job opportunities, right? And here we're including avenues for entrepreneurship, you know, in areas like telemarketing or e-commerce, right? These things are evolving as we speak right now. You know, the pandemic is doing a lot to change the environment, change the way in which it is we do things in the business world, all right? So let's get a bit more into the advantages. So it allows us to expand our sourcing opportunities, right? Supply chain management, and this is really allowed for because of technology, you know, and communication, both of them, technology and communication. It allows us to secure a wide range of workers now, materials and products, right? Because of this digital age, you know, the internet and ease to communicate for us, for example, to have this class like this, right? It also allows companies, right, to find workers, materials, and products across boundaries and borders. So this allows for a larger selection of goods and services, and that means that you have the opportunity now to select whether you want a higher quality option or a lower cost option, right? It gives you the advantage also of reaching new consumers in new markets, right? And that's obviously because of globalization, right? You have access to more materials, more laborers, and you get new customers in new locations with new needs, right? For example, I can look at teaching students of the islands, right? We're all using the same syllabus, right? So it provides opportunity with online classes, for example, to reach new customers in new markets. There's more room to grow. So the new technologies, again, is shrinking the globe, is making people closer. It's easier for companies now to grow. Some companies could just have online presence only, right? And from that online presence, they could offer more, they could sell more, right? Because it encourages expansion in terms of their reach, right? Where they could go with their customers. There's also a lot of more opportunities to save money, right? This benefits comes up around from the fact that you can now outsource or find options for workers, right? Certain things that you may be able or you were previously doing locally or in-house, you might be able to outsource to somebody else to do for less, right? So basically, just having more options gives you more opportunities or chances to either save on spending or to increase your profits. Now, obviously, this does not go without disadvantages, right? There's the disadvantage of globalization, right? Globalization obviously brings with it its own set of perplexities, competition, things like this, counterfeiting, right? There's product complexity, rapid product obsolescence. Things come here today, and it's like a fad in a couple of months or years time. It's not as relevant as it was before. Globalization, although you're able to reach across borders, there's a lot of regulatory complexity involved because you're now operating in different places that may have different laws. Management blunders is another thing that come about of this, because sometimes you just expand too quickly and you can't handle that level of demand. And then operating in such a volatile market, right? When we remove these borders, it means that market conditions can change very rapidly, right? Things like natural disasters, political instability, and even now very prominent, a pandemic is something that we probably would not have considered 2-3 years ago, could affect your entire operation. So if we drill down into these disadvantages, we could see that obviously when we increase our scale of operation, there's a lot of management issues that could be involved, right? We find that when you find the opportunity to grow a business, it usually comes together with increased supply chain complexity, right? Companies basically, when they start to operate across borders, there are a lot of problems that they may not have considered or may not have encountered previously because they were operating on a more domestic level, right? This could be issues in terms of inventory, being able to have enough inventory to supply the demand. And then there could be distribution issues in terms of how are you going to get it to the consumer, right? And what kind of legislation might be involved there. There's greater risk, obviously, because here you're going to have probably materials, factory customers all over the world. And it means now that you are more open, or you are to the mercy to global events, right? Whereas before, if you were operating domestically, you might have to just deal with 2 seasons, rainy season, hurricane season, and dry season. You have companies operating in other places, you're going to have to deal with the 4 seasons, right? So when we are looking at supply chain management, the mere fact that globalization is at play here, it requires the person that is managing the supply chain to have more risk management plans in place so that they could prepare in the event something happens, how they're going to manage it. Global competition, I was saying that, right? As we expand operations or as globalization continues to increase and we are operating across borders, we not only have access to more suppliers, more workers, and more consumers worldwide, we also have the added competition, right, of other persons probably operating in the same areas as we would. So what that means is that we have to have a very efficient and well-run supply chain, and that allows us to be very competitive in the market, right? It means that we would have more satisfied customers, we'd be able to deliver on our promises, right? And overall, have more efficient management of the entire supply chain. So there's also the challenge here with information collection challenges. Reason being because you're operating in different parts of the world, you're going to increase the complexity of getting your product to the customer. How are you going to manage the data collection and oversee the changes in this information that has to be involved in terms of getting the details of where these things are going to be going, setting up with your transporters, your charters that are going to be moving it, right? Your brokers, these people are going to have to get involved. So there's a field called big data analytics, and that is something that is trending in the area of supply chain management and logistics. And that helps these people to basically tackle that problem that they have with managing the collection of the information and sorting the information, as was most importantly, so that it is available, it is accurate, and it is useful. Legal issues, I mentioned that if you're operating across borders, each country is going to have different legislations involved, different laws, different regulations, right? And you may have to produce information in some places, whereas you may not have others, or you may have to meet certain legal requirements, whereas in other places you may not have to. All right. So that kind of brings us to the end of what I wanted to cover today. So just to close off, 5 new things you learned today. Where possible, give me an example. All right, 5 new things that you learned today. You can think about it, give you a minute or two, think about it. And then you're giving me 5 new things what you learned today. And where possible, give an example. Yeah.